Alright, YouTube, I'd like to go into a little bit about religion. I know people have been asking for more religious material on my channel, so I've decided to accede to their wishes and give them what they want. And I'm not bothered about it because I like talking about religion anyway, because it's basically what gave me YouTube momentum in the first place, so here I go. I would like to talk a little bit about the big three religions in the Western world, that is Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, and talk a little bit about how, in a way, you can almost see the budding resurgence of occultism in their religious groups. Actually, you could term them occult in the first place. When you really look at it, the only thing that's really separating prayer in a Christian setting, you know, mass, prayer, genuflection, whatever, or any of the various Jewish rituals or so forth, or Islamic ritualism, you know, the Hajj, whatever, the only real thing that differentiates them from occultism within the left-hand path is the generalized, and this is a very rough and generalized view of it. There's a lot more refinement to the actual idea than even I know. But if you look at it one way, you can say that the only thing separating prayer and so forth from the occultism is that the right-hand path groups, you know, the Christians and the Jews and Muslims, they're asking their gods for intercession on their behalf. The Christian would kneel, and they would say, "Oh God, please let me have X, Y, and Z," or "Please protect me from X, Y, and Z." You know, "Save my daughter from breast cancer, Lord." You know, "Lord Jesus, help me, you know, overcome the fact that my boss is an asshole," or whatever. And that's how they would do it. In the left-hand path, the practitioner might produce some sort of self-styled ritual. It wouldn't be the idea, for instance, with the Christians, well, you have to kneel to pray. Well, you have to genuflect before you pray if you're Catholic. Oh, you have to confess and take Mass. Or you have to, you know, do any of a number of things. They are prescribed dogmatic rituals, which prescribe a very specific, specified way in which you're supposed to go about asking for the intercession of the God, or gods. On the left-hand side of things, you would have the practitioner perhaps structuring their own ritual, designing it literally themselves. It's a totally new ritual nobody else has ever done. They might take inspiration from other rituals or other ritual sources. They might use symbolism. They might use, you know, chanting. They might use a black candle, a pentagram, an upside-down cross, anything which has significance to them. And they would design that ritual, and then they would go about it whatever way they decide to do it. Now, there are other groups within loosely what you would term the left-hand path. There are a lot of gray areas between the left and right-hand path that people don't... For instance, Wicca. Wicca could be seen as a border between the left and right-hand path. It can be solitary, it can be in groups. There may or may not be any prescribed dogmatic rituals. There may be a leader, there may be just basically a commune of witches. And so it really doesn't fall squarely in either side, which is something, for instance, most Christians fall squarely within right-hand path. Most independent Satanists, anyway, would be squarely left-hand path. Most people in the Church of Satan are neither. Most people in the Church of Satan are essentially just atheists that paid $200 for a little card. So we won't go there. But if you look at it, and you really look at the real true right-hand path religions, Christianity, Judaism, Islam would be the big ones, it's just amazing that anyone can believe the sort of things which they believe in. They actually believe, Christians actually believe, that the entire world was flooded, despite every bit of scientific evidence to the contrary. There is zero evidence there was ever a biblical flood. There's mounting evidence that it never happened. Geological evidence, archaeological evidence, fossil records, etc. It's amazing that people still believe in it. They believe that a dude, back in the Copper Age, made a boat big enough to fit 2 of every animal on and sailed it on the seas for 40 days and 40 nights and landed on Mount Ararat. Now, we've never found an ark. We've never found any evidence that that's true. Looking at ecology, the models of animal migration just don't fit with the idea of a mountain in Turkey being the new progenitorial location of life. The population density of the Earth is way too high for it to be 6,000 years since essentially round 1 of Armageddon. They believe all sorts of strange things. You look at archaeology. Did you know that there's actually no archaeological evidence that there was ever a city of Jericho? That's listed in the Bible. What about Sodom and Gomorrah? There's no archaeological evidence they exist, despite the fact that all of these locations have been searched for hundreds and hundreds of times, both in the modern and the older ages, because you've got to realize most archaeologists back in the early 1900s, the 1800s, they were interested in biblical archaeology. They wanted to find the Grail. They wanted to find the Ark of the Covenant. They wanted to find, any number of things, the Veil of Christ or the True Cross or any of these things. So they searched around the Holy Land quite extensively. Egypt and the Holy Land, the heliocentrists in Egypt and the biblical sort of people in the Holy Land, so-called, were the big archaeological movements back during those periods of time. And it was hobby archaeology. I mean, it wasn't, scientific archaeology like they have now. New kind of coffee. My throat gets dry at times, sorry. So there's no archaeological evidence of any of these places existing. Look, and here's the biggest slap in the face of Christianity. Look at the Exodus. Now, the Bible claims that the Jewish race was brought into Egypt by the Pharaoh and enslaved. They spent a bunch of time there, and then all at once, the people crossed over the Red Sea, because the Red Sea was parted by Moses, and spent, years and years in the wilderness wandering around, and then they found the Holy Land, the land of milk and honey, and they lived happily ever after they committed genocide against all of the pagan natives. That's the Bible story. Now let's look at real history and real archaeology. There's no evidence that the Jews were ever mass immigrated into Egypt. There's no Egyptian records of that happening. The Egyptians kept detailed records of many major affairs of state. Why is it that if all of these plagues actually happened in Egypt, there is zero mention of them? There's zero mention of an emigration from Egypt of these people, or of the Pharaoh taking the chariots and the men and going to kill the Jews as they were crossing the Red Sea. There's no evidence of any of these things. If the Egyptians had seen a pillar of clouds in the sky leading away hundreds of thousands of Jews, you'd think that they would have recorded it somewhere, but there's no records of it. Now, I've had Christians try to convince me. I've had Christians tell me, oh, well, there are records of the Exodus. They are found in the pyramids. Look it up. So lo and behold, I looked it up. I don't see it anywhere. You see, these people have been brainwashed by one another. Their leaders tell them that there's evidence. Some progressive Christian asks his preacher, well, is there evidence of the Exodus? I haven't been able to find any. Oh yeah, there's evidence. It's on the pyramids. And then they tell him to go away. So then that Christian spreads the word to everyone else through general conversation. Oh, I was talking to my pastor. He said that archaeology has proven the Exodus because of inscriptions in the pyramids. And soon hundreds of thousands of Christians think that's true. And these tend to start in fundamentalist circles, and the fundamentalists, unfortunately, are the most open about their faith online. So it spreads online quite quickly. So these people will tell you, well, and the Muslims do this too. The Muslims do it too. Oh, well, look it up. It's on the pyramids. It's not on the frickin' pyramids. Number one, there'd be at least one article online about it if it were, because it would prove the Exodus happened. Number two, you'd probably hear about it when you're studying archaeology. I'm majoring in archaeology. I've never heard about that. I've taken 3 courses already on Christian history. I've never heard of any inscriptions on the pyramids. I think I would know by now. I've looked it up myself and I've asked others about it. Nobody can find any information on it, so it's probably not true. I've had them claim that the Ark has been found on Mount Ararat, and lo and behold, when they link you back to an article, it's produced by a Christian media outlet. It's a story about a Christian organization that went to Mount Ararat in the first place. And they never peer-reviewed their articles, and they never actually divulged any physical evidence that they had found anything. No pictures, no pieces of wood, nothing. They're not allowing the legitimate scientific community to actually study their findings. That's because they're not finding anything on the friggin' mountain. They will never find Jericho. They will never find Sodom and Gomorrah. They will never find evidence there was an exodus out of Egypt. And lo and behold, accurate history tells us that the Jews weren't the only people that were brought into Egypt. There were a various conglomeration of slaves that were brought into Egypt at the time. What the Exodus actually was a very slow emigration out of Egypt as these people won their freedom. You know, their they would get older, and the slave master would be like, well, whatever, I'll get new slaves and let them go, or whatever. And these people would group together in small bands, and they would go across the Red Sea, probably in boats, or maybe on the Sinai Peninsula, and they would go to other lands, and they would slowly populate there. There was never a mass immigration into Egypt, and there was never a mass emigration out of Egypt, and there were never any plagues. They just didn't happen. There's no evidence of a king named of a prime minister named Joshua who saved all of Egypt by telling him to store up grain during the good years to outlast the famine. There's no evidence that that actually happened. If you look at legitimate history and legitimate science, legitimate meaning peer-reviewed, no axe to grind, and the Christians can claim all day long, well, the scientists are all a bunch of godless heathens. Here's the other thing. On one hand, they claim, oh, well, more and more scientists are becoming Christians every day because the evidence makes them Christians because they realize there has to be a God. And they never talk about the fact that could mean they turned into Muslims or Jews or whatever. They're always Christians in this fairy tale myth of theirs. And on the other hand, they say, well, those damn atheists and liberal scientists, they're always trying to prove the Bible wrong because they hate God. So which is it, basically? So they talk about these scientists, and the legitimate scientific community, they're always talking about how anti-biblical they are. They're terrible, they eat babies and stuff. I'm talking about legitimate, no axe to grind, unbiased, peer-reviewed material. There's no evidence for about 90% of what the Bible claims. There's not even any legitimate evidence there was a Jesus Christ. And yet, he's the most famous person in the world. He may not have even existed. Because of political movements in the late Iron Age that structured themselves around a detailed Christology of this perhaps mythical figure and all of the wonderful things he did and the wonderful symbolic message at the time of his life. The basic symbolic message being, unless you take communion and do what we say, you're going straight to hell, because that benefited the church. Oh, well, you never would have guessed. You never would have guessed that people would have said, well, if you don't follow this church, you go to hell. Even the idea of hell, and here's another piece of information, the very idea of hell is a pagan concept. The early Christians didn't have a hell. It didn't exist. They had a Sheol. They had the idea of Gehenna, the garbage pit where the fires burned the trash. So that was a symbolic and metaphoric statement about people who were evil and against God were no better than trash. But they never had a literal place called hell where non-believers went. That developed far later in pagan times. You look at Christmas, you look at Easter. Easter is a fertility celebration. Christmas is a solstice celebration. They were both stolen from pagans by the Catholics. You look at Christianity, it has borrowed and stolen about half of its structure from paganism. And yet this is the inerrant truth and word of God. Sieg Heil. Hail the glorious Jehovah. It makes absolutely no sense. They had no history and archaeology backing them up, no biology, none of the sciences agree with it, practically anything in the Bible. And then here's the one thing above all. They say, well, something had to create the universe because the universe couldn't create itself. But then you can point out the one inherent truth and the one error in their statement. What created God? And you point that out and it drives them mad. They'll drive themselves crazy going in circles about, oh, that doesn't make it, God didn't need a creator. Well, if God doesn't need a creator, the universe didn't need a creator either. Ha ha. So just a little bit about religion, just having some fun. Peace out.